Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Go ahead and grab your Bible and let's look at, go back to the 25th Psalm. We'll be picking up at the 15th verse and we'll see where we get to. How's that? Don't know where we'll end up today, how far along we will make it. Again, David is kind of pouring out his heart here a little bit, is one way of putting it, as he writes. And so we've been looking again at this psalm, and again, this is a psalm that basically appears to be David um, dealing with some difficulties that have come out of his sin. And all of us, I think, can identify with that. We have our share of problems that come along, I guess, quite naturally in life. Things occur. But it seems like, speaking personally, more times than not, my trouble is of my own making. And that's where David finds himself. And we're seeing how David, how he reacts, what his response is when he finds himself in that situation. And so, picking up in verse 15, David says, "Mine eyes are ever toward the Lord, for he shall pluck my feet out of the net." And as I see that, to me, this the first thought comes to my mind when I read that statement again with that background. That this psalm is David dealing with the results of his sin. Something is going on that, in his mind at least, is directly a result of his sin, most likely his sin with Bathsheba. And in that setting, in that situation, David says, "My eyes are ever toward the Lord." And that struck me a little bit because I think about how most of us, let's not talk about in the context of a situation with God, but let's talk about maybe in a situation with our parents or our spouse or something like that. A lot of times when we are, when we're guilty, we tend not to make eye contact. I guess is what I'm trying to say. We tend to kind of look away, or we hang our head, we look down. But David in this situation says that his response is going to be to place his eyes ever on his Lord. David is again in some vile situation. We don't know. This is one thing that some think about this psalm is that David, this was written as Absalom has rebelled or is rebelling, and David sees it as the natural, result of his sin with Bathsheba. And so David, when he would be saying these words, was looking at the possibility of at least being overthrown, removed from his throne, possibly having his life taken. In those days, you didn't have peaceful coups; you had murderous overthrowing of the sitting king. And so David finds himself in that situation. You can imagine the emotion, the pain, the grief, the distress, the depression. Think about how you'd feel if one of your children rose up against you, came against you, and all of us have had children be disobedient, but his child was being more than disobedient. His child was trying to destroy him. And so David is If you look down at verse 16, you see it. David describes his internal feelings. Turn thee unto me and have mercy upon me, for I am desolate and afflicted. David felt alone. He felt attacked. And at that point, he says, I will focus my eyes on the Lord. And again, I think about that, most of us, I think, in that situation, it's kind of weird. We get in those situations, and instead of focusing on God, we turn from God. And I'm just thinking, kind of talking out loud, thinking out loud here. A lot of times in that situation, if we were dealing with humans, you can picture God saying to David, "Well, you ought to knew better." And so David not wanting to focus on God, but David, even in this situation, is focusing on God. Why? Why would he do that? Why would he continue to place his eyes on God? Well, he tells us why. He says, "For he shall pluck my feet out of the net." David realized something that sometimes, for some reason, we tend to forget. And David realizes that God alone, God was the only one that could possibly save him. David, again, he tells us in verse 16, he is desolate or alone and attacked. And so he recognizes that his only hope in this situation is to turn to God. It's hard again to tell how long the timing of this psalm, how long it had been since he had committed his sin with Bathsheba. But look what he says. He says, God alone can get me out of the net. David says, he felt like he was trapped. He was caught by that sin from so many years ago, and that the only way he could get out of that trap, the only way he could get out of that net from his enemies, from his son, from those who were turning against him, was for God to deliver him. And so he asked God, he says, "Turn thee unto me and have mercy on me." And so David recognizes that God is the only one that can. And so he goes to God and he asks God, and think about that statement, "Turn thee unto me." You hear that? David is in a position in his life where he says to God, basically, turn around and look at me, face me. And that tells you, I think, a lot about where David was mentally and spiritually, that he feels like that God has turned away from him, that God has taken his eye off of him. That's he says, "For I'm again desolate and afflicted." That's the position, the condition David finds himself in, is that he feels like that God has abandoned him, and that he is alone again and completely desolate and afflicted. One of the other things I notice here in this psalm, in this passage, is David doesn't place blame. He doesn't say, "God, why have you turned from me?" I think David knew what was going on, and he accepted responsibility for his sin. But he's asking God here for mercy. And so he begs God for mercy in this situation. Verse 17, he says, "The troubles of my heart are enlarged. Oh, bring thou me out of my distresses." And so he goes to God and he asks God, here he says, "God, to get me out of this mess. It's getting worse. The troubles of my heart are enlarged." He says they're getting worse. Bring me out of my distresses. And so he's pleading with God for deliverance. Look upon mine affliction and my pain, and forgive. Here it is again, and forgive all my sins. He again is asking God for forgiveness. He's not blaming. He's not angry at God for what's going on. He's accepting responsibility. David knows he has sinned, and he knows that sin has consequences, and so he's asking God for deliverance. Consider my enemies, for they are many, and they hate me with cruel hatred. Cruel hatred. Again, the Hebrew words that are used there, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but they simply are words that mean that to hate somebody so bad as to kill them. It's that big of a hate. And David is in a situation. David's sin, it wasn't a secret anymore. Everyone knew what had happened, that he had committed adultery with one of his best soldiers, one of his most loyal soldiers, one that had put his life on the line, then had arranged to have that same soldier killed to try to cover up what he had done. And so David, again, there were some who thought he had, no doubt, thought he had tried to, he had tried to overthrow Saul. And so David's enemies think they're right in what they're doing. And so David cries out and says, Lord, forgive me, my enemies, they're many, they hate me with a cruel hatred. David knew what an enemy was. And so he says, oh, keep my soul and deliver me, and let me not be ashamed, for I put my trust in thee. Oh, keep my soul really means guard my life. David said, keep me alive. David knew that the only way he was going to survive this was if God intervened and God stepped in and protected him from the mess he found himself in. And he just said, he said, Lord, I'm putting my trust in you, because that's the only place I have that I can possibly turn to. Let integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait on thee. Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his trouble. David is saying, Lord, forgive me, protect me, because I know what I did, and I am a different man. I ask you to forgive me. Now, instead of adultery and murder that was in my life, I have integrity and uprightness. And so he's pleading to God for his redemption. And so as we look at that verse and consider how this psalm, how it wraps up, I think there's a good lesson, several good lessons for us as we think about this psalm as a whole. One of them is that sin has long tentacles. Sin has a lot of consequences that go on and will affect our life for a long time in many different ways. Most of us, and I think if most of us would keep that in mind, it would change our likelihood for falling to the temptation of Satan. If we would remember the danger, the long-term danger of sin in our life. that we need the Lord's help to avoid that temptation, to continue to do the correct thing. Another lesson is that when we do find ourselves reaping what we have sown, that we, what we tend to do is we find ourselves, I forgot, you've heard this saying in somewhere, and other people, we find ourselves in a hole, we keep digging, and that seems to be the case. What we learned from this psalm with David is that when he found himself in dealing with the long-term consequences of his sin, he says, I'm going to focus on God. I'm going to focus on the Lord. I'm going to put my eyes on Him. I'm going to trust Him because He is my only hope of deliverance. And so, as we wrap up that psalm, this is a good psalm. I would, encourage you somehow to make a note of, so you can refer back to it again. All of us at times find ourselves in these type of situations where we're reaping what we have sown. And David reminds us again that when we find ourselves in that situation, we quit digging and we put our focus on God and His help and His help alone. Hope that psalm helps you. I hope it'll stick with you as you deal with life's troubles and problems, that our only hope comes from God Himself. All right, have a great day, and we'll see you back tomorrow.